I was glad Randy asked that question about whether or not people knew me, and most of you do, and you came here anyway, so I really appreciate that. I'm so grateful to Randy for his willingness to lead our efforts here in Fayette County. Fayette County is going to be very important to us in this election, and so I'm happy to be with you all tonight and to continue to work on our presence here in Fayette County. I'm also delighted to announce to you that my good friend Linda Mink is going to be heading up our efforts in Coweta County. To try and accomplish with you all this evening is just to tell you a little bit about my personal background. I want to tell you a little bit about why I am running for the office of Secretary of State. And I want to tell you what we're hoping to accomplish and why I think I'm your best choice on May 22nd, because at the end of the day, you've got 4 people to choose from in the race. So first of all, let me tell you a little bit about myself. My family moved to Columbus, Georgia when my great-grandfather took a job with the Eagle and Phoenix Mill in downtown Columbus. He worked in that textile mill for the better part of 50 years. My grandfather dropped out of school in the 8th grade during the Great Depression, worked a lot of jobs to support our family until World War II broke out. And then he enlisted in the Army. He served in the Pacific. When the war ended, he came home. He married my grandmother, who worked at commercial printers in Columbus. And he did a lot of different jobs in the immediate post-war years. He was a railroad conductor. He was a milkman. He and my grandmother eventually saved up enough money to open a little grocery store at 5th Avenue and 8th Street in downtown Columbus. And they had a number of small businesses over the years. They had a filling station. They had another grocery store. One of my earliest childhood memories is of refilling the Coca-Cola machine at their laundromat, which was the last business they had before they retired. And I tell you all of that. My dad was the first member of our family to go to college. He went to Auburn University, and he worked in that same Eagle and Phoenix Mill in the summertime to pay tuition. And he went on to law school. He's been practicing law for 40 years. Yesterday I was trying a case over in Opelika, Alabama, and Dad was arguing a case before the 11th Circuit in Montgomery. So we were all over in Alabama yesterday. But I followed in his footsteps. I had the opportunity to get elected to the state senate in 2010. And I tell you all of that to tell you first a little bit about where I am, where I come from, but also to tell you, my family has really been able to live our American dream for the last 4 generations. We've been able to chart our own course, pursue our dreams, and largely achieve those dreams. And I think that's because of how unique America is. My dad represented a gentleman who had moved to the United States from the Philippines. This is 10 or 15 years ago. And he asked him, did he miss the Philippines? Did he miss being away from most of his family, because most of them were still over there? And he said, Mr. McKoon, I am so happy to be in America, because in the Philippines, if you're the son of a cobbler, then you're going to be a cobbler. But in America, you can be whatever you want to be. And so, having the opportunity to achieve an American dream, I think is something some people take for granted. But it's something that I am keenly aware of, the opportunities that have been afforded to me and to my family. And I think that it is getting harder and harder for the average person to achieve their own American dream. And I think the principal obstacle is a government that has gotten too large and has gotten in the way of people who simply want to be able to chart their own course and live out their dreams. And that's what got me interested in Republican politics, basically from the age that I could drive a car. And it's what got me interested in running for the state senate, and it's what got me interested in running for Secretary of State. Now, the 2 most consequential decisions of my lifetime, one was in Easter of 2002, when I made a decision to commit my life to Jesus Christ. Amen. The other most consequential decision of my lifetime is marrying Jacqueline, and I'm so happy you're here tonight. So why am I running for Secretary of State? If you remember nothing else I tell you tonight, I hope you'll remember this. I am running to be your next Secretary of State to make Georgia the fastest state in the nation to get a job and the toughest state in the nation to cast an illegal vote. It's just that simple. And people ask all the time, well, I get the elections part because most people are familiar enough with the job, they know that Secretary of State's involved with elections. But what about this jobs business? How is the Secretary of State going to impact people's ability to get work? And the answer is that we have all these licensed professions in our state, dozens of licensed professions in our state. And you know what a license is? It's a permission slip from the government to go to work. 40 years ago, about 1 in 20 Americans had to get a license to go to work. Today, it's closer to 1 in 3. In Georgia, we have layered on an awful lot of bureaucracy that I think is unnecessary when it comes to professional licensing. Now, there are times, because of public health or public safety concerns, that we need to have some sort of licensure process. But I would say to you that if tomorrow we decided that no longer do librarians need to get a license from the state to do their job, that the public health or public safety would be impacted. I would also say to you this. On average in our state, a cosmetology license holder, somebody who has a license to cut and color hair and do nails, they spend 350 days in training before they get their license, before they get their first paycheck cutting hair or doing nails. Now, to give you a little point of comparison, an EMT, the person who's in the ambulance responding to your medical emergency, on average, that person has 31 days of training when they get their license. So something is profoundly wrong back there, but something also is profoundly wrong with a system where it takes 10 times the training to cut and color hair as it does to render life-saving aid. And so we need to get the government out of the way. So as Secretary of State, I think job one is ask the question, is this something that we need the government to be involved in? Do you need to go get permission from the government to do this job? If the answer is no, then we need to deregulate it. Now, for those that are left, we need to ask the question, is there an easier way? Is there a better way to get that person connected to the dignity of honest hard work? Go back to the cosmetology license for a minute, and I'm not picking on that particular industry, but I spoke to a young woman about a month ago who said, I really want to get this license, but I don't have any interest in doing nails. I just want to cut and color hair. Why couldn't we break that test up? Why couldn't she just get a license for what she wants to do? And let her go to work and start making a living and paying taxes. Why wouldn't we want to do that? Americans for Prosperity, a group I know a lot of you are familiar with, they conducted a nationwide study that found 5.4 million new jobs could be created if we would simply perform licensing reform across the country. Now, if you scale that down to just Georgia and you take a very conservative figure, you're talking about 250,000 people connected to the dignity of honest hard work. And we don't have to give away the store. We don't have to provide a bunch of tax incentives. We don't have to manipulate our laws. All we have to do is do what conservatives want to do, which is get the government out of the way. Amen. Now, while I'm on the subject of Amazon for just a second, I want to mention something to you, which is that there's been a lot of discussion about the religious freedom legislation we have had debate over for the last several years. And people have asked me about this and how it impacts businesses. Here's what I believe. I believe that businesses are attracted to the freest nation on earth and the freest states within that nation. The more free the people are, the more free the market is, the more likely it is that a business is going to want to locate here. And I think it's critically important that we elect people who believe that, and that we elect people who understand that the Bill of Rights is not a cafeteria plan. You know, all 10 amendments to the Bill of Rights were important. They were important enough that our founders, who spent all this time on the Constitution, said, you know what? We didn't get it quite right. We need to add these guaranteed individual liberties, because you know what? One day in the future, that federal government might get so big that it wants to take away individual human freedom. And so our best check against that is to write it down. And when we've seen judges limit that, it is the duty of legislators and people who believe in a free society to say, no, you should get the highest level of protection of every one of the first freedoms enshrined in the First Amendment. We should never be ashamed of that. We should never apologize for that. So the second job that I want to spend a moment talking about as Secretary of State is in the corporations division. If you start a business in this state, if you start a nonprofit entity in this state, you're going to have some contact with the Secretary of State's office in filing the paperwork to get your corporation created. We need to have a culture of customer service because that's largely the front door of state government. For a lot of people, it's the first time they interact with somebody in state government. We need to make sure that the attitude of every employee in the Secretary of State's office is, how can I help you? How can I get you to where you need to be as quickly as possible? Not throwing up barriers, not throwing up obstacles to people being able to do what they need to do. The operating philosophy, whether it's license renewal, whether it's corporations, ought to be, we want your interaction with the Secretary of State's office to be excellent and as brief as possible so that you can get back to the business that provides income to feed your family. That is what we should be doing in the Secretary of State's office. And we can do a lot better when it comes to online services and the delivery of online services, as well as our overall customer service in the office. That's something that I'm committed to work on. I plan on appointing a task force to work with me on that issue. And that's something that we're going to spend a lot of time on when I get elected Secretary of State. Everybody, thank you. Everybody wants to talk about elections, and so I do want to spend a few moments with you talking about elections. I don't know how many of you saw the story yesterday, but we have been sued numerous times in the administration of elections. Most recently, we've been sued over the conduct of the special election that took place this summer for Congress in the 6th Congressional District. And one of the key allegations had to do with data resident on a server at Kennesaw State University. And yesterday we learned that someone at Kennesaw State wiped the server of all the data that is the subject of this lawsuit. This is the latest in a series of issues with elections administration that I think raise some pretty troubling questions. And so the first thing that I intend to do upon being elected Secretary of State is to engage in a forensic audit of the entire elections process from beginning to end. We've got to do something about restoring confidence in our electoral process. I mean, that is at the very core of a system of government that relies on elections. People have to have confidence in the result of our elections. Now, the other thing the Secretary of State has to do to be a guardian of our electoral process is when the far left files meritless lawsuits, the Secretary of State has to be willing to go after and defend the position that the General Assembly has taken. Let me be real clear with everybody here. You know, we have a supermajority in the state Senate. We're close to a supermajority in the state House. We control every statewide constitutional office in this state. The far left is not going to change Georgia election law under the Gold Dome. But they haven't given up on that. Instead, what they're trying to do is change Georgia election law in a federal courtroom before a judge appointed by Barack Obama. And so you need someone who has some experience practicing election law. I am a lawyer. You know, you can insert the joke here. But in my law practice, I have spent some time litigating election issues. So I understand the legal issues that are going to be coming before the Secretary of State's office. We saw a lawsuit last summer where the left was saying, we need to extend the voter registration deadline. And I want y'all to follow me on this for a moment because it's important. Georgia has a law, most of you probably know. You have to be registered 30 days before an election to vote in the election. Why is that important? Because we need to have confidence in the voter roll. We need to have confidence that the list of people who are registered are residents and that they're otherwise qualified to vote. And that's why election administrators need that 30-day window. And really, if you think about it, it's more like a 9-day window because early voting starts 21 days before the election. But the left said, oh no, that's not the way this is going to go down. We need it to be 30 days before the runoff. They get the decision they want. And what was the response of the state of Georgia? We surrender. That is absolutely the wrong response. If the far left wants to rewrite Georgia election law in the courts, we're going to need to go to Washington, D.C. and have the United States Supreme Court tell us that the law is going to be changed. We shouldn't allow a single federal judge to do that. We had 2 lawsuits filed in Hall and Gwinnett County last year to have election ballots printed in languages other than English. Now I want you to think about that for a moment. When you become a citizen, if you travel to this country to pursue your American dream, like that gentleman from the Philippines I was talking about earlier, you go through a process to become a citizen of the United States. And part of that process is passing a test. And in that test, you have to demonstrate basic proficiency with the English language. So I want to be clear because the folks on the left want to say, when you say these sort of things, oh, you're a bigot, you're a hater, instead of you just expect the rule of law to be followed. But what I am telling you is this: while we welcome people from all over the world to come immigrate legally and participate and pursue their American dream, the price you pay to participate in our political process is understanding English well enough to vote. And that is a position the Secretary of State's office needs to defend, because when counties and cities get sued, and I know there's some local elected officials here tonight, they have a tough decision to make because they're stewards of your local property tax dollars, and they've got to ask themselves, how much money are we going to have to spend on lawyers to defend these lawsuits? The Secretary of State and the General Assembly ought to be coming into that situation saying, we've got this. We're going to take care of you. We're going to have your back. You're not going to have to worry about being spent into oblivion defending what is a common sense public policy position. Because frankly, what the folks on the left are interested in is balkanizing our country, dividing us and setting us against one another. So we've got to have a Secretary of State that defends against those legal challenges. The last part of elections I want to cover with you this evening has to do with some legal changes that I think we need to make. Georgia is a state where you can pay someone to register people to vote. And what do I mean by that? I don't mean you can pay somebody by the hour and say, go sit at the mall or whatever and collect voter registrations. I mean, I'll pay you $10 for Alton's registration, and I'll pay you $10 for Nancy's registration, and I'll pay you $10 for Matt's registration. Can you see how that's an invitation to voter registration fraud? Yes. So we had a situation in Columbus where one of these organizers with the New Georgia Project, a project of one of the Democratic candidates for governor, which is out trying to register voters, allegedly, they went up to this young 18-year-old who was in Columbus participating in a travel ball tournament, not a resident of Georgia. And they say, we want to register you to vote. And he said, well, I don't live here. That's okay, that's okay. We just need you to fill out this form. And so he fills out the form, right? And they tell him you're going to be registered to vote. So they get their $10. He thinks he's registered to vote. They send it to the Muskogee County Registration Office where it's promptly rejected because he doesn't live in Georgia. He's not a resident of Muskogee County. When he tries to go vote in November of 2016 for president in his first election, he was denied that opportunity. He was denied that opportunity because we have a law in place, or we don't have a law in place, to prevent these sort of bounties from being paid for people to register to vote. So the next Secretary of State needs to work with the General Assembly to outlaw that practice. That does not need to happen ever again in our state. Absentee ballot reform. We've got to have absentee ballot reform. I'm just going to tell you one story, and I can tell from your reaction, you know this issue. But in Columbus, we had a lady come in with 19 absentee ballots. She came down to the elections office, had them in an envelope, said, I want to cast these 19 absentee ballots. They're not in the sealed envelopes they're supposed to be in. But thankfully for us, U.D. Roberts, a Republican member of our Board of Elections, happened to be there, and he started asking some questions like, why do you have those 19 absentee ballots? Why are they not in the sealed envelopes? Where did you get them? So they separated them out. They found out these 19 folks were all residents of a nursing home in Columbus. They further went out to the nursing home and found out that 15 of the 19 ballots had been cast by people who were not well enough to sign their name or make their mark. And I'm going to give you a little spoiler alert. They didn't vote for Republicans. Big surprise, right?
I'm shocked.
So we have a process right now. If I show up early to vote, I've got to give them a voter ID. If I show up on election day, I've got to give a voter ID. But if I request an absentee ballot, get the absentee ballot, vote it, and send it in, there's absolutely no verification process whatsoever. That must change. And the Secretary of State's office is going to have to do that. Now, they are probably going to fight us on that one, but you know what? And that leads into the last thing I want to talk to you about tonight, which is, anybody can get up here and talk to you about the issues I've talked to you about this evening, about what needs to happen in the office. We've got 4 very nice people running for Secretary of State in the Republican primary. We've got 4 people who have professional accomplishments that are running for Secretary of State. So how do you make that decision? How do you decide on May 22nd who to get behind? And I'm going to give you a couple of reasons tonight why I think that person should be me. The first reason is this. You probably saw the television commercials in the John Ossoff, Karen Handel congressional election. Am I right? Okay. So the left spent $30 million trying to steal that seat. $30 million. They filed all these lawsuits. That was to win 1 out of 14 congressional elections in Georgia. The next Secretary of State will be Secretary of State in November of 2020. Does anybody know what's going to happen in November of 2020? Donald Trump will be on the ballot for re-election. If they were willing to spend that kind of money, and they were willing to file all those legal challenges to flip 1 congressional race, what lengths will they go to try to steal Georgia's 16 electoral votes? Because Democrats cannot win a fair statewide election. Not right now in Georgia. The only way they can do it is by putting their thumb on the scale. So you need somebody who understands the law, number one. You need somebody who is not going to back away from an uncomfortable conversation. Now, those of you that know me and know that I've been in the legislature these last 7 years, when I ran in 2010, I ran on ethics reform. And I got in there, and some very powerful people, some people even in my own party, said, well, you know what, if you keep pushing this, you're going to be gone in 2 years, and there isn't going to be any new ethics reform. Well, 3 years later, some of those very same people wound up voting for Georgia's first ever limitation on lobbyist gifts to elected officials. Then we got on to this issue of religious freedom. And really a pretty simple issue, just saying that everyone should be treated the same no matter what level of government they're dealing with. And they said, oh, you're never going to get this through the General Assembly. Well, 2016, we proved them wrong. Now, the governor vetoed it on Easter Monday. That's true, he did. But What has happened in the last 6 months? We have 4 leading candidates for governor in the Republican primary. Do you know what they all have in common? They have all signed a pledge to support the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. Now, I will humbly submit to you, you don't get there by being a nice guy. You get there by being a forceful advocate for what each and every one of us believes. So you need a Secretary of State that's not going to run when the media starts putting pressure, when the left starts putting pressure, when these lawsuits start coming. You need somebody who's going to stand in the gap and stand strong to defend the legal principles we all believe in and share. Now, let me tell you the other reason that it is important to nominate the right person in this race. I don't know if anybody's heard, I was talking to some people today and they had not heard yet, but the most prominent Democrat on the statewide ballot next November will not be Stacey Abrams or Stacey Evans. It will not be their candidate for lieutenant governor, whose name I can't recall. It will be Congressman John Barrow, who is going to be their nominee for Secretary of State. Congressman Barrow was able to win in a marginal district over Republican candidates who are well qualified and well funded. He is a very dangerous candidate. You do not want to put up as your nominee and put on the debate stage with John Barrow somebody who is, for the first time, debating and discussing these issues. You want someone who can skillfully present the Republican message on these issues and, more importantly, prosecute the case against John Barrow. And I would submit to you that of the 4 candidates in the race, I am best positioned to do that. So I'll close by saying this: it's dangerous to give a lawyer a microphone in a captive audience. So I'm going to wind things up here. There are a couple of things I want to ask you for tonight, because I learned from Alton Russell, you don't get the order if you don't ask. Number 1, the election is May 22nd. I need your vote. Josh McKoon. When you get down to Secretary of State, look for Josh McKoon. The second thing that we need, you heard about Randy helping us here in Fayette County. And as he said, it's not something he's going to be able to do alone. We need you to sign up with us this evening. Matt Fuentes, who's my political director, standing in the back of the room. So as you get ready to leave later this evening, I hope you'll stop and talk to Matt and just share with us your contact information. We're not going to bother you or spam you. We are going to contact you and reach out to you to help us win this election, because this is a down ballot race. I was being introduced to somebody the other day, and he said, hey, this is Josh McKoon, he's running for Secretary of State. If he gets elected, he's going to go all over the world and negotiate trade deals. It's going to be great. And the person was like, that sounds awesome. And I said, well, no, that's not what the job is. But a lot of people don't know what the Secretary of State does, much less who's running for Secretary of State. So the most valuable thing you can do for me, other than vote and sign up with us, is to be an advocate and a cheerleader for us. Everybody here has a network, your church, your bowling league, whatever it is you do, at work. We need you to be spreading this message and letting people know, if you like what you've heard tonight and you think these are good ideas that need to move forward, we need you to help us by telling your friends and neighbors. Y'all have been very kind to listen to me this evening. I am overwhelmed that you would give up your Friday night, and so many of you. I mean, I could go around the room and talk about a lot of stories, but I appreciate y'all being here tonight. Your friendship means a lot to me, and I appreciate your support.